to be free, and for every man's dignity to be respected, and for every man's freedom to be respected with dignity. And when we cop out of the principles enshrined with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, ladies and gentlemen, that's not only a travesty of human rights, but a travesty of the basic fabric of humanity, especially for an ideal that has received groundswell for support for not only basic standards of living, but basic recognition and inclusion within a society. So this debate can never ever be about utilitarian counter-considerations about what point we need to stop benefiting people. It's asking the question, at what point do we draw the line? And at what point does a principle become a mitigating factor for all that utility that you're talking about? And that's why we bring to you today that we can do this, and it's within our every right to do this. Before I go into my point of positive matter, in which I'd look at why this is going to be an impetus for global wider social change, and why we should never restrict free movement, I'd like to deal with some points of rebuttal. Firstly, I would like to deal with a point that Desmond brought to us. Oh my God, sorry. Can I just stop? I never rebuttal on the page. Sorry. Firstly, I'd like to deal with Desmond's point about why it's not going to be effective, and then secondly, why it's going to be detrimental to South Africa. But to deal with some quick realignment and clarity, I'd like to clear something up. And what Desmond told us is that he didn't understand our distinction between when it's a diplomatic tie and an economic tie. Let me just repeat what Kate told you. Kate told you that these specific relations are based on specific principles that govern that relationship. So a diplomatic relationship is based on those principles of diplomacy. An economic relationship is based on those principles of economics too. What she told you is that specific relations can have specific implications, and if they fall under those principles that govern that relationship, then we're very quite happy to include it. That's how we deal with it. But then, to deal with these points about why it's not going to be effective, and he told us that we're not going to be creating change because we're backing people into a corner. Ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that's the exact reason why it's going to work. We say that countries now have an incentive to make a cost-benefit analysis of losing all these benefits of those diplomatic relationships and making a very small change to the constitution. We think they're going to stand up and they're going to accept that. We ask that why can't a country accept such authority? But secondly, he said we're not going to change the situations for the people because people aren't going to be able to accept this kind of change because it's entrenched with that country. We say that we don't care because those very same changes are propagated by those people within those countries. We say that when majority of people within America didn't want black people to have emancipation and free rights within the American civil rights movement, we didn't pay lip service to them, ladies and gentlemen. We need to give these people because they deserve these rights based on equitable need. But more than that, we say what legislative equality does is it gives you legal recourse for something. So now the government is not actually taking care of you. You have every right to tell them that they're not doing that, and you can see such recourse. And then he continued to tell us that the reason why it's not going to be effective is that people have a lack of education. And if you promote development, people are just going to suddenly get this education. We think that's just casual correlation between thinking that people have education and that's eventually going to lead to some sort of learning curve that happens. We say that very rich countries where people are very rich and have some sort of expertise, like Saudi Arabia, have huge homophobic laws and they don't change that. But more than that, we say that if you're saying that people aren't going to change under our policy, under your policy, where we're trying to bolster this engagement and incentivize them, it has equal capability to not work. And we say that the very reason it's not going to work under your policy as opposed to ours is you don't give people any sort of incentive to actively weigh up and consider these huge cultural entrenchments. We say that if people hold these elderly relatives and entrench this culture within them, how they're going to change by just having a nice coffee break and tea with them, discussing such issues. We say we give them an active incentive. We give them an active incentive that compels them to do that, and we hold them accountable in that way because we justify this change to them. So that's all. So then the other issue that he brought to us is why it's going to be detrimental to South Africa. And he said that it's going to be detrimental to South Africa because we get benefits from these relationships. We get benefits from these countries, and we want to maintain that benefit. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to subvert our principles and subvert our stance just because we can get benefits from something. We don't think it's ever legitimate to tell us that you can just sacrifice a principle that you hold true just because you get benefit from it. We say that many countries throughout the world could have had benefits trading with the apartheid government because South Africa was very rich in resources, but they decided not to do that. This debate is asking if we can have a narrative where we can impose some kind of view, where we can tell people that, hey, what you're doing is illegitimate, then we should be allowed to do so, ladies and gentlemen. And that's the principle that they have to engage with on today's debate, in which we think they failed thus far, and that's why they're losing. So to go to my points of positive matter, I'm firstly going to tell you why it's going to be an impetus for social change. And I bring to you today that we're going to change the mindset of many countries throughout the world, but more importantly, moderate countries. So ladies and gentlemen, the countries that we're talking about are specific countries that lie in between of the spectrum. They're moderates, they don't know where they stand, in terms of full gay rights, or if there's some gay rights. And the countries we're talking about are countries like America, countries like the UK. So there's a change we're going to do. We're going to tell them that they can stand up for something, that they can have a strong claim to something irrespective of those consequences, and they can have that strong claim to that issue to that extent, which means two things. Firstly, it means that the country can lean forward into another position. I'll tell you, I'll take it in a moment, man. And we say that it stimulates specific groups within that society, like civil action groups, like we've seen, like the LGBT plus movement within America, that were inspired to have a strong claim of their rights after many countries started ratifying and accepting gay rights laws. Tell me where I'm wrong, ma'am.
How would cutting ties with the US government in any way force the US government or harm it enough in order for them to change their constitution? And
no, ma'am, we're not saying we're going to cut ties with the US government, ma'am. What we're saying is that we're going to cut ties with countries that have explicit homophobic laws. What we're saying is that an add-on benefit of this policy is we can have countries that don't know where they lie in between of the spectrum to lean in to full emancipation rights. We say that even if that was the case, we say that we think that that's going to be specifically important if it can galvanize and stimulate other countries throughout the world to do the exact same thing, which is my second reason, is that we show other countries to consider boycotting and to consider actually abstaining from such engagements within these countries. We say that's the very same reason why the apartheid government was pressured to end the regime when a lot of countries started going to that direction. We say specifically at a time when gay rights and emancipation and the LGBT plus movement is at a tipping point throughout the world. We say that's important because we change the mindset of people, but more than that, we tell them that they can. And now the second point is dealing how this is going to be specifically important domestically because we're not going to restrict free movement. Ladies and gentlemen, it's important for people to be able to move. It's important to allow us to delineate with the society and to interact with that society. If we're going to impose this change, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to mitigate that factor. And we say that we want to show these countries that we're not going to allow for that. Because what happens is, as a South African, a gay South African, you can't travel throughout Africa, you can't go to Nigeria, because if you're gay, you're going to be slaughtered and you're going to be killed, because it's punishable by death. We say that we want to uphold this value of movement by telling these other countries that they can't do this. They can't not recognize people as members of society and give them equal rights within that specific society. Ladies and gentlemen, this is specifically important because we recognize the value of these rights, because in the absence of the recognition of such rights within our very history, it's been a pivotal moment and an important part for us to be able to hold these principles and to be true. So ladies and gentlemen, what have I told you? I've told you, in a world where the struggle to free yourself from the chains and oppression and institutionalized oppression, we don't have to think about what effects this is going to have on the majority of people. We have to think about what debilitating this effect is going to have on the majority of people. Ladies and gentlemen, we want life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but we have to show others that it can happen.